204 here, or as I like to be known as, Harley D. Stacy, and this is a different background. Yeah, see, this time I'm deciding to do a little bit more in my bedroom. That way we can have a little bit more of a, fun environment. Plus, the wall of D&D stuff is currently being under renovation, so to speak, and is actually in the living room. Kind of a little hard to film a video when you've got family that lives up in the front of the house and you live in the back of the house. So I decided, you know what, I'm gonna do my video here. Now, today we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic today. See, my cousin, I won't give you a name, I'll just call him Descu. That's the easiest way to go about it. Descu has specifically asked me that he wants to get into Dungeons and Dragons. You know, how the best way to do that and how to get into a game. And I decided, you know what? We're going to make a video. We're going to make a video about it. So here's the deal. Getting into Dungeons and Dragons is so much easier nowadays than it used to be. I currently, at the day of this video, 11/1/2021, I am currently 23 years old, and I have been playing Dungeons & Dragons for 7 years. Now, to say that I've been playing it for 7 years doesn't mean I've had the books for 7 years. Believe it or not, I've had the books for about 5. So, on my 18th, I was 18 years old, it was Christmas, and my folks still wanted to get me something. They were like, well, what do you want? And I just couldn't help but think to myself, well, there's one thing that I do want, but it's too expensive. I'm 18, I should be able to go and get it myself. Well, after much prodding, I finally told them, well, I want a player's handbook. Because going online, at the time, anyway, going online to find a player's handbook and character sheets and all that for Dungeons & Dragons was actually pretty hard. You could, type in the comments, well, what about PDFs? And back then, about 5 years ago, PDFs were actually getting slammed a lot back then. But nowadays, you can actually find like 6 to 7 different PDFs on the player's handbook alone. So it's not that hard. But 5 years ago, it was, because, around 5 years ago, 5th edition had just come out, right? Like, it just come out in terms of business years, where it stretches out 10 years. It just come out, technically. It was still in its infancy. Nowadays, it's so much easier to find stuff like that, but it's almost impossible back then. So, for that Christmas, my folks got me a player's handbook. And I sat all night before I had to go to work and read it. I loved Dungeons & Dragons. I loved role-playing games. I had played 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons for about 3 years before, or 2 years, my bad. I had been playing 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons before I got into 5th edition. And I wanted to get into 5th edition because it was the newest one. It was the newest edition, and I was getting tired of THAC0. Anyone who's played 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons will know that THAC0 was just... it made the game so much more complicated than it needed to be. So 5th edition, I got my book, and I was like, yay, great. I spent all night reading it, and then went to work. So I had all that knowledge in my head, and all I wanted to do was play. I actually didn't get a group together until about a year after, where I was trying to get a group together from people that I had met at work. I won't tell you where I work, but it's not fun. But I met one of my best friends at work, and she and her boyfriend decided, well, we'd played Dungeons and Dragons before. We didn't have a good time with it because our DM was a douche. And I simply was like, well, come play with me. Come sit at my table. We'll have a good time. So I had them come, another friend from work who was really, really a cool guy. He was really good. He was really fun. And he was very laid back. He was chill. He was a cool guy. And then we had my cousin. So you remember that in my video about Vaden, I talked about Mouser and Black. This is the same cousin. In fact, the first character that he played, Mouser, was in that first group. But that's how I got into Dungeons and Dragons, is I grabbed a bunch of my friends from work, my cousin, and we sat down and we played. And at the start, I wasn't very good, because this had been my first official table that I, myself, had dungeon mastered. Mostly because, to start, I was always a player. I always found a game, sat down, played. Never once did I be a DM, because DMing looked scary, and I didn't have any of the things I needed for it. But when I had the player's handbook, I was like, I can dungeon master. This isn't going to be a problem. First of all, if you're going to play Dungeons and Dragons, be a player first, then be a DM. Do not start off as a DM. And the reason why you want to do that is because being a DM will hinder you when you play as a player. And I'm so glad I was able to avoid this, because now I have the skills that I need to be a good player as well as a good DM, instead of just being a good DM and doing power builds. Which, power builds can be fun. In fact, I am currently trying to get into a game and building a character from a YouTube video that I watched that I was like, I think that'd be kind of fun to play. I want to see what happens when I drop this on my players' tables. Plus, my DM that I'm trying to get into, again, flat out told me, build something overpowered, please, build something overpowered. Okay, for those of you who know Offbeat Outlaw, that's kind of where I'm getting my power build from. And it's like, that looks like some fun. So, thank you, dude. That was great. Anyway, that's not to say that I know Offbeat Outlaw. It's mostly I watched the video and it was like, cool. That looks like some fun. But this is about how to get into Dungeons & Dragons. So, I would recommend, for anybody who is getting ready to get into Dungeons & Dragons, I would recommend first getting the Player's Handbook. Whether or not you have to get it from a PDF, whether or not you have to get it from the book itself, which is like a $50 price tag. It's $50 to $60. Or, and this is actually a service that I will talk about at the end, primarily because it's going to rectify a good chunk of what I'm talking about. So, first things first, find a way to get the Player's Handbook. Read it, learn it. You want to stomach as much of that as you possibly can. Okay? Next is getting yourself a set of dice. If you're like me, who is a dice goblin, I won't lie, I love my dice. You guys saw earlier that I had dice towers in my other episodes. I love dice. One of my friends from a long time ago actually explained them to me as click-clack math rocks. And it was like, yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of, D&D is actually a really good utility tool for kids. It is. It's really good. It's a really good learning tool because you can actually take the dice and implement it into them learning, because you do a lot of addition, a lot of subtraction, and you can actually do multiplication with it too, depending on how you handle critical hits, critical successes, that kind of thing. It also encourages reading, like a lot, and these books are relatively big. These books are about 300 pages, depending on the book. But the core 3, which I will get to later, are 300 pages. Easy. Um, so, yeah. In terms of the dice, it doesn't really matter what kind of dice you get. I know a lot of people are like, well, some dice are weighted, and you don't want the bad weighted. Well, it's like, as starting out, you don't really care about that. You just care about dice, needing a set, and playing. So, one way you can do it is you can talk to your friends who are dice goblins, going back to this, uh, and asking them for a set. Because guaranteed they have a set they don't like. Or guaranteed they have a set that's just plain. You don't need anything fancy smancy, you just need something to start you out. And starting out with, a set of just solid black dice with white numbers, it's not a bad thing. In fact, I know some players who flat out went and just bought Yahtzee dice to play Dungeons and Dragons with. I've seen them do it. The only ones that you really need is the D20, the D10, definitely the D10, and the D6. The other ones, depending on the weapon you're using, you don't really need them. In fact, like I said, I've seen entire people go into a game store with $1, buy 25-cent dice, and only buy those 3, and be fine. It's like, well, my weapon takes a D10, my character takes a D10, I'm fine. And it's like, great. A lot of games don't really need you to have all those other dice. Like the D12 is basically useless. It's hit points and a weapon die. So yeah, you know, um, that's, dice isn't that hard to get. Go to your local game store. 100%. Go to your local game store. I guarantee they have some way of getting dice, even on the cheap, even with $1 to $2 to $3. That's whether or not you're playing online. We'll get to that. So, you have your book, you have your dice. How do I get into a game? Well, getting into a game is actually not as hard as it used to be. To those who used to play in advanced Dungeons and Dragons era, back in 2nd edition AD&D, I feel terrible for you guys. Getting into a game back then was impossible. You had to have a group of friends who got into the game, and you guys didn't end up arguing for half the session every time you played. Because back then you also had events like RPGA and stuff, but that was only in certain towns, and then there's the fact that RPGA didn't happen all that often. These are just the horror stories I've heard. So for me, it was like, well, I was lucky enough to have a group that I played with 2nd edition, and it was only like 4 people. It was the DM and 3 of us. Not a big group by any means, but it's big enough to at least play. Speaking of, you can play Dungeons & Dragons solo. You can do it. It's not impossible, but it's no fun. The biggest draw of Dungeons & Dragons is having you and 2 to 3 other friends to be able to bounce stuff off of. It's never fun when it's just one-on-one, I'm sitting here talking to you. Because then you essentially then start developing into bullshit, where you're just shooting the shit and just having fun. The game kind of becomes because really, if it's just one person, the DM has to come up with a bunch of NPCs to help fight if they encounter anything hard. And if they don't encounter anything hard, then that one player gets bored because it's like, well, I'm just one-on-oneing most of my fights. A lot of the game is based around team combat, having multiple things to fight with multiple allies. It's action economy. Which is why, in terms of, combat and players, you want to make sure that the action economy is the same, which I will get into later with the DM section, because there's the players section, and then I'm doing a DM section. So for the players, the best way to get into a game, there's actually 3 ways to do it. Go to your local game store. I'm not even joking, this isn't a bit. Go to your LGS. Go to your local game store and just ask, do you have Adventurers League? Which I believe is the new RPGA. So it's like, do you have any Adventurers League going on? My local game store that I go to here in my hometown, they have RPGA. They actually have RPGA. They have Adventurers League, which is, you can essentially drop in, drop out. But it's only one DM who's DMing at the time. And then you have Pathfinder, which happens later in the week. I believe on Wednesdays. So, and I believe they also have another D&D thing. They have 2 D&D events and a Pathfinder event. But that's still an event. That's still something. It's better than nothing, honestly. Because a lot of game stores that don't care about that kind of thing don't do it. Because you'll know that a lot of local game stores, I actually have 4 in my town, and only 2 of them do Adventurers League. One of them I personally do not like, because you go in and they're like, oh, you want to play an Adventurers League? Great, give us $5. Which, okay, it's the cost to play. It's $5 to sit at a table. But for me personally, that feels like I'm whoring myself out, and I just don't like it. Then there's the local game store that I go to that's like, oh, you want to play? Okay, roll up a character. Just make sure that the table's not full. And it's like, okay, great. Cool. Then you have, that's 1. 2, getting your friends together and just going to your house and playing. Like, find some nerdy friends who love the game, or who want to learn to play with you, and just sit there and play. Go to your house, fucking set up a table, and just go, okay, now we're just gonna roll some dice and have some fun. Make it a learning experience so everybody learns. Or have that one player who knows the book inside and out, and it's like, okay, you're gonna help us learn this game. That's another way to do it. And then there's the last way that has been in the more recent era. Online. There are so many platforms nowadays that you can do stuff online. There's Discord, there's Zoom, there's Skype. There are ways to communicate well across the internet. There are so many ways to do it. But my personal favorite is Roll20. For those who don't know, Roll20 is a system, or a website, more accurately, that allows you to essentially go in, send, you can essentially look for exactly what you want. It's like, okay, I'm going to look for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Okay, there it is. Cool. I'm going to set that up. I'm going to start playing. Or you can go in and ask people, hey, can I join your game? And people would be like, yeah, or no, depending on whether or not the game was open, or, that kind of thing. You can make your games private so that only you and your friends play. That kind of thing. For me, Roll20, I want to play on Roll20. I do. The problem I have with Roll20 is I can't seem to find a game worth playing on there. And usually when I actually start looking, it's more or less like, oh, we have a slot open, but we won't start until the next week. And by the time I actually, go, okay, I'm going to send them a message, I'm like, I don't want to wait that long. That's why I play on Wednesdays, is because on my Wednesdays, I play my game, and then I go looking for personal games. For me, personally, I do not like playing D&D online. I have to play on a table. I have to play with friends at a table. And yeah, you could say, well, that's a little old-fashioned, isn't it? Oh, yeah. No, 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 no. It is 100% old-fashioned. And I will admit my fault here and now. I think it's a bad habit that I've picked up. But for me personally, I like being at a table with my friends and being able to go, well, here's the deal. Being able to actually look them in the eye and flat out just like, role play. Like role playing is the biggest part of the game, but you don't get that connection when you're doing it over online. Now, a lot of people would say, well, there's a lot of content creators that can do it, and it's like, yeah, you're right. EXP to level 3 proved that when COVID hit. There are so many ways to do this now. But for me personally, and this is just personal preference, I like to be at a table. However, Roll20 and other systems like Discord and Skype and all that for your friends or getting together or finding a group to play with, it's not a bad way of going about it. But that's basically it. Read the books, get some dice, learn the rules, get some friends or get some people and play. The best experience is going to be playing. Like, One Shot Questers has a skit out called D&D Dungeons and Dragons Stereotypes. And in that video, he brings up the noob section of it, where it's like, this is how noobs react, or new players. And one of the new players is like, wait, I can do that? That reaction is one of the best feelings a dungeon master can ever get, is introducing a new player to the game and then just immediately going, I can do that? Really? I can try? That feeling is always great. It's euphoric. It feels great as a dungeon master. And it's primarily because we don't get to experience that anymore. We kind of have this air of, yeah, we know how this goes. So, on to the Dungeon Master section. How do I get into playing Dungeons and Dragons as the Dungeon Master? Okay, this one's going to take a little bit. So, first of all, 100%, you do not need, and I do mean this, you do not need a map, you do not need minis, and you do not need scattered terrain or anything like that. Don't get me wrong, those help, especially in combat. It helps a lot. It also gives you a perspective of what's happening in the world, that kind of thing. If you're going to throw a very complex fight at the players, maybe get that stuff. But it is absolutely 100% not needed. You do not need that stuff. There's only 4 things you need: the player's handbook, the monster manual, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and a full set of dice. That's it. You don't even need a DM screen. Personally, I love using my DM screen just because I love being able to go, here, I get to hide. I love it. But you don't need it. You absolutely do not need it. But the books, you do need. 100%. If you are going to be a dungeon master, you need the books. And you need the books specifically so that when you're dungeon mastering and something comes up, you can just go, got it. That is what you need it for. 100%. Do not think for a moment that you can just, oh, I'm just going to fly off the seat of my pants and not know anything as I do it. No, because something's going to come up that's going to make you think, is that how that works? Or, and this is the biggest one, you accidentally make a monster homebrew, because you don't have the monster manual, you accidentally make a monster that's so powerful, it kills your party. And a lot of people will be like, well, isn't the DM against the players? Shouldn't he be trying to kill them? No. The DM should not be trying to kill the players. Whether death or not happens is up to whether, well, more or less up to the dice. If the dice decide it, they're dead. But, and if you think about it like this, the DM should never be against the players. Never ever. That mindset is so toxic. It is so demeaning to players to have that mindset of just, oh, I'm going into this session to kill them. If you're going to do that, do one-shots. Don't play Dungeons & Dragons to be like, oh, we're going to tell a fantastical story. This is going to be Game of Thrones. No. Do not try to kill your players. Do not try to kill your players. Whether they die or not should be a determinative factor of three things. The dice screwed them. The monsters hit for a lot, aka the dice screwed them. Or they're being foolish. If you throw something at your players, there should be a minuscule chance of success. There should always be a chance of success. There should never, ever be a moment in the game where you're just like, okay, here's 30 dire bearers. We're level 1. Well, I guess you're going to have to run away then, aren't you? They're faster than us. Oh, well, sucks to be you. That's how a lot of DMs act, and it's not okay. Honestly, it should be along the lines of, if their only option is to run, to make it to where they run and can get away. Have a plan as a player. And I'll get into that in a different video. Probably next week's video. But the plan should always be, for a DM, my players should be able to succeed in some way in this fight. Be it just killing a couple monsters and making the rest run away. It should have some form of success. And a lot of people are like, well, you played Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. How can you have this mindset when a lot of people that have played that game have the mindset of failure is inevitable? Well, it's because, yeah, failure is inevitable, but the DM should be smart enough to make it, the failure, not just killing the players. As a DM, it is your job to tell an interesting story with your players. Not against them, not for them, with them. You should be able to sit there and decide, okay, the party's struggling here. I'm not going to just make them run away. Give them will saves. Make them roll wisdom saving throws to see if they succeed. Depending on how many people they've dropped is the level of difficulty. There are ways to go about this other than just being like, oh, well, they're dead. And like I said, death should not be the main thought process. Death should not be to steal a thought from Spoonie. If you have Han Solo, Chewbacca, and Luke arrive on the Death Star, and then 3 new people show up to leave, your story's kind of fucked. Because the other 3 are dead. That this is the thought process, You have this modicum of, well, I'm the DM, I'm all powerful. You're really not. Yeah, you throw encounters at them. You make the world. You tell them how it is. But that power is only yours as long as your players are at your table. The moment your players tell you, you know what, fuck this, I'm done, and get up, you just lost power. And a lot of it. Because now you've essentially disrespected that player at that point. You should never get to the point where your players are thinking to themselves, this fucking sucks. I don't want to play in this anymore. And this also leads into dealing with problem players. How do you get around that? How do you deal with it? 9 times out of 10, a DM doesn't, because they don't want to start a fight and they don't want to lose the game. This is where, instead of your players just getting up and saying, fuck this, I'm done, you kicking them from the table will actually give you a little bit more power. By simply looking at your player who is being an issue, he's being sexist to your female players, he's being misogynistic, he's being an asshole, he's being a problem. He's disrupting the table, he's making everybody uncomfortable, nobody wants to be there because of him. There has to come a moment where a DM or whoever owns the table to stand up, look at them, and tell them, you are not welcome at my table, please leave. Don't be an ass about it, don't try to be, Billy Badass, get the fuck out of here. No, be nice about it. Obviously, just stand up and tell them you are not welcome at my table anymore, please leave. Or pull them aside and talk to them. This is the biggest thing, is as a DM, you have to talk to your players. You have to communicate with them. Whether it's inside the game or not, whether it's outside the game, you have to communicate with them. If that problem player is just having issues that day, sit down and talk with him. Find out, hey, what's going on? And if this attitude persists, and every time you pull him aside, nothing changes, then kick him. For me, I have a 3 strikes you're out kind of mentality. The first of my 3 strikes mentality, if you miss 3 sessions in a row without it being a legitimate reason, I don't want you at my table. Now, that's not to say, oh, you had to work today? Well, sorry, you're gone. That's a legit reason. Being sick, that's a legit reason. Happening to go to a fucking funeral, that's a legit reason. I am never going to tell you that Dungeons & Dragons is more important than your own personal life. I just would like to be informed. As the DM, I would like to be told, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it, something's going on. Even if it's something stupid as, I'm feeling depressed today and I don't want to come. I get it. So I go, okay, not a big deal. It's not a strike against you. It's a strike against you when you simply say, oh, I'm too tired, I'm just going to go back to bed, and not call me. So if you don't tell me you're not going to be there, 3 strikes, you're out. It has to be in a row, though. I never just do it for, I tried having one player try to game that system where they're like, okay, I'm just not going to show up for 2 sessions, show up for a session, not show up for 2. Eventually, about a month in, I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to fly with me. You're gone. But that's a legit problem. Another is being sexually harassing people in-game or in real life. I'm not going to stand for it. Me personally, I am not going to stand for it. I'm going to stand up and talk to you about it. I'm going to call you out. Because it's like, this isn't okay. And once I figure out what's going on, and if it improves, great. If it doesn't, 3 strikes, you're out. I am not afraid to kick my players from tables. I have done it multiple times. Later on in years, I've had players come back to my table because they got better. More accurately, they got better about hiding it. But as a DM, you essentially have to be a peacekeeper. You have to be kind. You have to be nice. You have to make sure you're essentially a therapist. You have to sit there with a freaking clipboard and go, how do you feel today? Without actually saying it. You have to play this character. You have to put on this mask of just, okay, I'm I'm Canada, I'm neutral here. Um, so that's that. Oh, what else? I mean, getting into being as a dungeon master, one of the biggest things that I could say is getting yourself a module if you're starting out. Kind of advice for would-be dungeon masters is get yourself a module. Just a module. It doesn't matter if it's a one-shot module. It doesn't matter if it's a adventure module. Get yourself a module to start to learn the game, because they will help you out immensely. Don't jump straight into homebrew. Trust me on this. I jumped straight into homebrew and it failed. Kind of. Okay. As a want to become an author, I have turned my first 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons adventure into a book, into a novel. And I'm currently editing it right now. And it's like, by all stretches of the imagination, this should have fallen apart. So I'm just glad that I was able to get a good story out of it. But yeah, as a DM, you kind of got to be that peacekeeper. You got to be kind. You got to be nice. You got to be willing to stand up and say, "Hey, this is wrong," or "This is okay," and just being able to say yes. This is another big thing with DMs, is being able to sit down at a table and a player asking you, "Can I do something?" And it's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" It's like, "Well, I want to jump this chasm. I have 30 feet of movement. I can long jump. I have ways of doing it. Can I do it?" And it's like, "Well, you can certainly try." Or just saying yes. Just doing it isn't a bad thing. It's not terrible. You're allowed to have moments like that where it's like, well, let the dice decide. Obviously, if it's like, look, I want to cast Eldritch Blast. There's like 3 walls in your way. You can't see your target. Yeah, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, it hits a wall. Be able to roll with that. It's like, okay, you hit a wall, you scar it, but nothing happens. And it's like, oh, well, okay. If they don't learn, you can't properly teach them. 9 times out of 10, though, if you're sitting there and they go, well, can I do something? It's like, well, what do you want to do? And they explain it to you, and if you say no, give them a reason. Don't just say, no, that can't work. Here's a good example. One of my players wanted to take a, what was it? He wanted to take a gem, and he essentially wanted to convert it into a power source for his flame brand, so that way he could manipulate the fire. And he was like, could I potentially use this gem to turn my fire into like an ice fire? And I was like, well, no, because the magic for that is insane. You would need a high level spell for that. And he would go, well, I could just use an enchantment spell. There are a few enchantment elemental spells that I could use for this. And then you could say, again, no, you would have to do that at a higher level to change the properties of a magical weapon. But right there, that gives the player something to work with. It's like, oh, I need to do it at a higher level. Okay, there's their reason to adventure. I have a flame tongue longsword, and I want to turn it into a flame tongue with ice. You bet your bottom dollar I'm going to work to do that. I want to make my flame tongue boom with lightning. I want to make my flame tongue deal radiant fire damage. That gives them an incentive to go out and adventure. Like, I want to go out and level grind just so I can get that powerful weapon. And sometimes that's all you need. That's all you need to do is just give them an incentive. Give them a reason. It's like, okay, here's the world, here's all the stuff, here's a character, you know. And sometimes some players are just like, well, I'm not really interested in the story. I just want to sit here, roll dice, and have fun. And it's like, okay, well, if that's all you want to do, here's some scenarios to build up to that, you know? As a DM, that's stuff you have to work towards. And it's so hard as a DM to not cutscene. For those who don't know what that term means, cutscening is essentially where you just sit there and you tell your party, okay, this is what happens, and then your party goes, well, I want to do something in response, and you say, no, hold on, I'm doing something. That immediately kills the momentum. It immediately kills the flow, because then it's like, well, I'm not going to be able to do anything. Like, you sit down and it's like, okay, this princess is going to get her head cut off. I want to cast slow. I want to cast slow on the guy who's getting ready to pull the cord so that way he doesn't pull it as fast. I want to cast slow on the guillotine itself so that it doesn't move fast. It doesn't move. To which then you could set up a timer. Like, this is a cool encounter. It's like, okay, the princess is in a guillotine. He pulls the cord. I cast slow. I cast slow on the guillotine. Like, how would that react? Well, first of all, the guillotine slows down, and how slow works is it lasts for about 10 minutes, I think? 10 minutes to a minute. So 10 rounds. And essentially, the party now has a timer. They have a timer they have to work against now. Because it's like, okay, the princess is going to die in 10 rounds. We have to do this fast. 9 times out of 10, my combats only last until about turn 5. So, my players are already pretty quick. But that's because action economy versus characters, I usually give the players a little bit more in terms of the action economy. Which a lot of people will go, well, that's a rookie mistake, and you're right. But I do it on purpose because I have 3 players who are new to the game. And when I do throw an encounter that is supposed to be hard, I throw multiple things at them to increase my action economy. See, but think about that for a minute, Guillotine's coming down, one player casts slow, and it stops it. A cutscening DM would go, no, you can't cast slow on it. The guillotine comes down and chops her head off. She's dead. Now roll for initiative. That's not fun. It's like, well, great. Okay, well, my spell just kind of went useless. We couldn't save the queen. We couldn't save the princess. Whoop-de shit. But that one player who managed to get the slow off and make the freaking guillotine move half its speed, immediately he feels gratification. He's like, yes, it worked! That feeling of just adoration, just like, hell yes, I managed to do it. That's great. Now, a lot of people could go, well, that's not how slow works. You're right. It's not, because slow requires you to use it on a creature. This is another aspect of being a DM that you kind of have to let slide. Sometimes you have to fudge the rules a little bit, where it's like, okay, in terms of rules, if you're the rules lawyer, it's like, well, actually, if I'm going to use slow, I'm going to use it on the creature. That way he doesn't pull the card. But even then, that's not how slow works. Well, dude, I don't care. I think the scenario's cool. The players think the scenario's cool. Keep it. Keep the rule of cool. Now, there are ways that the rule of cool can go bad. And there are ways for it to just be like, well, it's not just cool, it's stupid. And a lot of people know exactly what I'm talking about. That moment in, like, an anime where it's just like, I'm gonna come up and start slashing across the monster's back and just do this epic, like, slash straight up its back. That's, like, stupid. Like, why are you doing that? Again, kind of going back to the guillotine situation. I'm gonna break the guillotine. Why? Like, why would you do that? It's like, you could break the guillotine, yes, but you could potentially hurt people and the princess worse by doing that, you know? So it's a catch-22. You actually have to think, use your brain and actually think, what am I going to do here? You know, but that is a discussion for another day. I've already gone on way too long about that. Uh yeah, getting into Dungeons and Dragons is fun. It's a great time. I personally think that if I was to get into Dungeons and Dragons nowadays, I would probably go about it a little different than how I have in the past. But right now, D&D is my life. I love playing the game so much. And introducing new people to it just makes my day. Oh, I forgot to mention something at the end of that video. So I'm going to kind of drop it here. For a player, another resource that a player can use to help them getting into the game is D&D Beyond. D&D Beyond is actually really a good service, personally, I think, because they allow you to make characters. They actually give you a max of 6. If you need to buy certain subclasses or stuff, they're like $2 a piece. And they actually slowly reduce the cost on books that you are buying stuff out of. So D&D Beyond is a really good resource for new players. I recommend people use it 100%. Just because it helps with the math, it helps get your character set up, and it makes it so much easier for a new player. So, yeah. Use D&D Beyond. So, with that in mind, I'm going to get out of here. And I want all of you to have a fantastic day. Thank you for joining me for the last 46 minutes. Of course, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Make sure to, do everything that, the YouTube algorithm wants, I guess. I don't know. I honestly don't care. And with that in mind, have a good one.